9:30. We're going to get started. So we will start with our approval of our April 26th policy committee meeting minutes.
Motion for approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Favor? Great. Thank you. Next up, we have 1.03 public comments. Looks like it's you, Ms. Dirks. We don't have the timer, so.
That's okay, my comments are brief. So good morning, I'm Missy Dirks, I'm president of the Frederick County Teachers Association, but I am here on behalf of all three bargaining units. Sharon Eberg is the president of FACE, and she is a cafeteria manager, and they had issues that she had to address this morning on her job. And Danny Rumpf was also supposed to be here, who's the president of FACASA, but he is the principal of Heather Ridge. And so I'm sure that is what is detaining him this morning as well. But do know that these are joint comments. We are here today to respond to some of the discussion at the March Policy Committee meeting regarding all three bargaining units in FCPS. Frederick County Teachers Association, the Frederick County Association of School Support Employees, and the Frederick County Administrative and Supervisory Association are the exclusive bargaining agents under Section 6404, Article 7 of the Public School Laws of Maryland, and as such have responsibilities, rights, and privileges that no other person or entity can have pertaining to the school system. One of those inherent rights is the ability to communicate with our members at their place of employment. We object to any interference by any party in that right to communicate. In fact, that right to communicate with our members and our members to communicate with us is at the core of our ability to carry out our obligation under law to represent them fully. Furthermore, the negotiated agreements for all three associations, in which the Board of Education is a signatory, recognize our exclusive bargaining agent status and the right to communicate with members at their work site. The associations take very seriously our responsibilities under the law and the negotiated agreement. We communicate that to our building reps and our members. As such, we delivered the associate in question to schools by having FCTA and FACE staff drive them to the schools. We included updated membership rosters so they would only be delivered to mailboxes of dues-paying members. Furthermore, in the spirit of cooperation, the three associations did communicate in writing to the FCPS Chief of Staff, Dr. Sergo, that at election time in the future, we will include broader range of association business in our newsletter. We value our partnership and go to great lengths not to use consumable system resources for exclusively election-related materials. We are confident that we have a mutual understanding of the current policy and are able to conduct our business within the current parameters. Thank you.
That is our only public comment for this morning, and we did not receive any via email for our meeting. So, proceed to 1.04, policy 102.
Great. So
James.
before we dive into policy 102, I just want to share two things and have Dr. Sergo come join me. The first thing I want to share is that for each of the policies, what you're going to see is two copies. One is a copy that is marked up, showing the changes, and one is a clean copy that would show what it would look like in the final version. I thought it would be helpful to see both. That doesn't mean, of course, that if changes are needed in the future based on the conversation, we can't make further changes. I just thought sometimes reading the red line copies can be kind of confusing and not necessarily the easiest. So the one that I'm going to refer you to are marked as meeting backup. Those are the red line version, or the marked up versions. The other thing I wanted to share is that after 102, the 116, 405, 444, the cleaned versions are not perfectly clean. So those are going to need a little more fine tuning, which we will clean up. it won't be any substantive change. It will just be cleanup, editorial cleanup before we present it to the board if it is approved by the policy committee. So turning to policy 102, this is the meetings policy, and this is the policy that we discussed at our last session for information and discussion, and what you have before you is the resulting policy. It is, of course, revised to align with our new format and template. And I'll just walk you quickly through what the changes look like. The policy purpose statement is just establishing, that the reason for this policy is to set forth expectations for how we're going to conduct our meetings. We've added a definition for student, and the reason that came up is in our internal discussions, we realized that there are homeschool students who have come to talk to the board in the past, and we wanted to clearly define whether they would be included in the general public or in the student group. We are proposing that they be included within the student group because even though they are homeschooled, they are still students. The policy statement section really articulates 3 particular interests for the board. 1, keeping the public apprised of matters of educational interest. 2, receiving public comment. And 3, complying with the Open Meetings Act. Turning to the implementation, you'll see a lot of this is unchanged. It's largely a lot of addition and things being moved elsewhere. So in 1A under public meetings, we articulate that we're going to have meetings twice a month, except for in 3 months, April, July, and December. And we never said when those meetings would be held for April, July, and December. So we thought clarification in that section was warranted. At the bottom of that section, we're adding language about requesting interpreters because we realized that there was no language providing guidance to the public about if they need a sign interpreter or a non-English language interpreter. We wanted to give information to the public on how you could go about getting that. And we feel that is an equity issue that we're trying to address by including that kind of language.
We have questions as we go through. Do you want to address them or do you want to?
However you would like. Go back.
Yeah.
Go through it and then go
Let's get
back.
through it
Okay.
and then we'll go back. Cal,
Okay.
is that all right?
Yeah.
I think so, sure.
So turning to the meeting format, which is the agenda. The only addition here to the agenda section is adding that the agenda will identify the anticipated date and start time and the link if it's going to be a virtual meeting. And this is really capturing something that is elsewhere below that we're moving up and just kind of reframing the way it's addressed. In the meeting section, the first big change is really the regular meeting agenda. We're striking out the reference to the we'll meet in the afternoon of the designated meeting days. That's covered by the new paragraph above that says we're going to tell you where and when. The work session it was just a line. There was really no information there about what that was going to include. And we felt that since the board will set its work session agenda, and that's going to be unique for each work session, that it didn't make sense to articulate a specific itemized list of what will be addressed. Rather, it's a part of the agenda that you have to set. So we didn't feel that there was a need for a statement there. And then the idea of recess for dinner and reconvene by 6 p.m., again, that's reflected in we'll state the date and time in the meeting agenda. Within the agenda for the regular evening meeting, there's 2 changes to note. We have divided the public comment period into a student comment period and then a public comment period. And then we have moved the action item from item 9 down below to number 11. We need to make sure the numbers are renumbered correctly. But we're moving that below the board items because the action items are largely going to be consent and they can be dealt with quickly. We want to get to the business of the board, first. In the conduct of the meetings, the struck language is really just a header. It's quorum and number of votes needed for action. It doesn't actually say anything, so we're removing that. And then we get to the meat, the part that everyone is really eager to know about, and that is the public comment section. What you see in the new paragraph A is information taken from below, moved up to the top of this section, again articulating the interest that the board has in receiving public comment, but also advising that it's not going to be a back and forth between the board and the public commenters. We've removed the language about adjusting the time allowed for public comment, making public comment available at work session. If you want to build that into your agenda, you'll put that into your agenda. It doesn't need to be articulated. So that brings us to the next substantive change, which is the time. We've increased the time from 30 to 60 minutes, with 15 minutes for student comments and 45 minutes for general public comments. We're noting here that if the student comment period is not exhausted, the board can reallocate that time to additional public comment. In reviewing this last night, I realized that's actually in conflict with something we say later. And so I'll ask you to identify for me which direction you want it to go, and then we'll fix that in the final version.
Can you state that part once more, please?
Certainly. So we're expanding the public comment time from 30 minutes to 60, splitting that into 15 minutes that are dedicated for student comments and 45 minutes for public comment. We understand that we may not have 15 minutes of student comment in every session. And so we want to create the opportunity to reallocate that student session time to the general public comment time. So there is still a total of 60 minutes allocated for public comment. Now, the way it's written up in this section, it says the board may move it. Later, it says the board will readjust. So I just need you to tell me which way you want to go with that, and then I'll correct the duplication and we'll fix that. We are making it clear that we're not changing the opportunity for public comment on any action item on the agenda, but we are making it clear that we're no longer going to be adding time at the end of the board meetings. The public comment period is the public comment period. Then paragraph G talks about the items that can be discussed, which is basically anything relating to the school system, except for personnel issues, complaints with respect to individual students, matters that are pending appeal. And we've added the advertising or solicitation for products or services. I don't know that that's been an issue here, but it is something in my research that other LEAs have included, and it makes sense because you don't want companies coming here trying to pitch to you their product or their camp or whatever, whatever it is. The next section is the new process for registration. We are now going to have a pre-registration process that will open 5 days in advance of the board meeting, so contemporaneous with the publication of the board agenda, and will close 2 days before. It'll be, pre-registration will be done either through an electronic form or by calling, and that's the phone number for the board's office upstairs. And then we identify the information that we're going to be asking for, your name and contact information, whether the topic is an agenda item or is a non-agenda item, what topic you want to discuss, and whether you need an interpreter or some other kind of accommodation. And again, that's an equity issue item that we feel is appropriate. The next section breaks down the comment periods. This is where we re-articulate the 3-minute limit and announce that it is going to be applicable to all speakers. We're no longer going to have the 5 minutes for representatives of businesses or organizations. A lot of what's in this paragraph is just moved from below to above. And then we break down how the slots will be allocated. 10 slots for speakers who want to comment on board agenda items. If there's less than 10 who sign up, we will allocate the rest of that time to general comments, again, maintaining that 60 minutes. 5 slots for general educational interest topics. And this is where that conflict with the student comment language above appears. And then if all available slots are not allocated from the pre-registration, we will allow for public comment from those who walk in same-day registrations. The selection process will be a first-come, first-served basis. Mr. Bass, we did talk about internally the possibility of randomization and what that would look like. And it really creates administratively a bigger challenge. There's no easy way to truly randomize. Random number generators really are not random. It's defined by an algorithm. The solution that we decided made sense, though, was to avoid having someone be able to, sign up to be first every single time, if you have spoke in the prior meeting, you go to the bottom of the list to speak at the next meeting. We felt that that was easier to administer and would still accomplish the goal of giving as many individuals the opportunity to comment as possible.
And that is only applied in the case of the available slots being maxed. So if we had, right, so if you've spoken every meeting, but we only have 8 speakers every meeting, you'll always continue to get to speak. It's only if the interest in speaking exceeds the 10 or 5, 15 total slots. Right, which has happened a lot recently. But we think, again, from an equity issue, we know Dr. Dyson and President Johnson and others have spoken about this, is we have to be mindful of not creating processes that favor, someone who can sit in front of their computer the minute the public comment opens and be the first one. We want to be mindful of people who have busy lives and are working, and they may not get to the public comment sign up the first one. And so we want to make sure that we're hearing from a range of voices, and that process will make sure that happens.
And then the last piece of this section is the notification. We'll notify those who are selected by email the day before, and we'll notify those who have not been selected as well, and remind them of the opportunity to submit via written comment. So the green text, if you're looking at the marked up version, that just reflects that it's a change. It's still there. It's just been relocated elsewhere. And if you like the use of the green for relocation, I can continue to do that. And we'll start to incorporate that as we revise policies going forward. Paragraph, what is marked as paragraph M, is the section that tells you how to submit a written comment. There will be an address that will be created. By the time we have the policy ready and approved, it will have been created, and we will locate it on the board's website at the address indicated.
And just to be clear, from an administrative perspective, in talking with Catherine Rich, this was what she felt would work best. I think initially we talked about having a form where people could upload, and she said it's much easier for her to grab things off of an email and then use that to upload. So we wanted to accommodate the administrative part of this work that will belong to her, and make sure that it makes sense.
And then the last change to the policy is the addition of this new section 7, which is the community listening sessions. Mr. Bass, that was your term, and I loved it. And this is the opportunity for the board to have town halls with the public. No formal business will be conducted. It will be a public comment conversation opportunity. No less frequently than once per calendar quarter. I know that we had talked about, do we want it more frequently? And I think doing it with a no less than once per calendar quarter gives you the flexibility to add if there are issues that are burgeoning and need to be discussed, but doesn't bind you to have 6 or 8 or 1 per month or whatever the number we were thinking would be. And that's the sum total of the changes.
Yeah, thank you very much for the work you put into this. Certainly, I think we're not just 1, but maybe 3 or 4 steps ahead of where we were. So thank you. A few questions. So with defining students more broadly, right? We have some special education students whose age, I think, goes up to age 21. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I think we would all agree they should have an opportunity to speak. What do we do, though, if it's a 19 or 20-year-old, I don't know, maybe community college student, or just 19? Or will we have any issue around age when we want to open that opportunity to our FCPS students who are above 18?
If they're enrolled FCPS students, they will qualify as students, because the definition of student is who is of school age regardless of enrollment status. And the enrollment status really is intended to refer to whether you are homeschooled or schooled at an FCPS facility. We can tighten that language if you think we need to do a little bit more clarification to make sure that it's understood that it's any current FCPS student regardless of their age, and then anyone who is of school age regardless of their enrollment status.
Perhaps saying something along the lines of including all FCPS students regardless of age.
Sure.
Cool.
Make sense?
I think in terms of the interpreters, we have the opportunity, okay, 10 business days is what's given as the parameter, except for public comment.
Mhm.
But our agenda is generally posted 6 days before, and the vast majority of people, well, I don't know about the vast, but people often speak in public comment because of what's on the agenda. So we should try to find a way to address that.
We talked about it. This, the reality is that our interpreter arrangement requires 10 days notice. So they aren't able to turn around an interpreter with less than that. And so that's the challenge that we face, which is unless the board was to move to having interpreters here as a base experience, meaning no one has to request it, they're here waiting for use. That is unfortunately, that's the reality of how long it takes to secure an interpreter. With our we use companies and other supports. We don't have on staff, to do that in less time. We could try, but it's going to be a minimum of 10 days typically.
Yeah, but I guess then the question is with public comment, you're offering this 2 to 5 days with interpretation. So how would we do that?
It's to the best of our ability. If we're able, we're able. And it may be that getting a Spanish interpreter would take less than 5 days. And actually, I think it's on the board's website that a Spanish interpreter only takes 5 days now. A sign interpreter, an ASL interpreter, maybe that's more easily done, but it may be a language that is not quite as prevalent may take more than 5 days, and we would have to let the individual know. We will put you on the list for those who want to public comment at the next session, and we will have an interpreter available at that session.
I think the issue is we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And so the 10 days is the typical reality. I think more often than not, we could do it in less than, but we don't want to commit to 5 days. I hear what you're saying though. If someone was to ask me what to do in that case, I would say to request the interpreter in anticipation that you are going to be requesting a public comment slot. So 10 days before the meeting, if you know that you intend to request a slot or you're hopeful to do that, secure the interpreter. It's always easy to cancel an interpreter than it is to get it in less than 5 days.
Yeah, we may just want to be consistent in that. I would love to offer the, posting the agenda 6 days before. It's really tough for me to support that you then have to be 10 days before for the interpreter. But if that is the timeline that that you have seen that we need, then we should not, I don't think, offer it in a shorter time frame actually with public comment. If 10 days is what it takes, then that's where we're at.
We can go back and talk to the staff and see if they, would advise even anything different. That tends to be what the advice of the staff are specifically, but I think the worry is if we put something in the policy that says less and we consistently fall short of that puts the board in a difficult position to say we haven't met what we indicated we would do. We don't want to overpromise. In 5 days, we find is sometimes very difficult to meet in regards to interpreter.
Can we stay with interpreters just for a second?
Yeah, of course.
Rather than moving on and coming back, and then we'll come back.
That's great, that's fine.
I just, there's no indication in E how to make the request. So if we could put
Okay.
something in there just about where individuals make the request, whether it's an email or.
Sure.
Just so people don't have to go searching for that.
Thank you.
Should I go back? Yep. For the visual demonstrations, the placards,
Which one are you on, just so we can make sure?
sure. So
Okay.
Oh, and
or
the
N or N2 or
disruptive comment. It's disruptive comment. That's the only change that you're seeing. It's down on page 7.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
7 visual demonstrations under disruptive comment.
That's existing language.
Do we have the microphone on or no?
I don't think so.
Ours are on.
Yeah.
Yours typically are not on, and
Yeah,
I'm
ours
not
are
sure why.
Okay.
It's a habit to lean forward though and speak into it, I know.
So my question there, does it give the board president too much discretion? basically, I think it does. I think what's gonna end up happening is if we see signs that we don't like, we're gonna be tempted to say, no, you gotta put those away, put those down. And if we see signs we like, we might not apply that in the same way. I'm concerned that it won't be viewpoint neutral.
Are you concerned with the board president part of that?
When you say at the discretion of the
It
board,
doesn't
you're
say
saying.
board
Oh, it doesn't say
says-
board president.
It says
All right,
discretion of the board.
so take
Yeah.
board president.
So it'd be consensus of the board.
I would say, Mr. Bass, since we've had a couple of examples recently, in terms of what is visually projected, the video cut of the speaker is so tight that frankly, when people bring those things, you don't even see it on the live stream. Right, so those visual things, I don't know if it gives any comfort or consolation, are only visible to typically the board. Unless you're sitting in a space where you can see it on the periphery. The actual live feed typically does not pick up things that people are holding because the camera shot is really of the speaker from the neck up.
But we have had situations.
We
in board
have, and
meetings
they've
where
tightened up the
people
camera shot
have-
because of that.
Just not
Well,
for
and it's
public
just-
comment,
yeah.
like people in the
Yeah,
audience
yeah,
holding
yeah.
that might be blocking other
Oh,
people's
that's a fair point, yeah.
view, or not just around public
Yeah, that's a-
comment,
that's a
but
fair
then, of
point.
course,
I'm more concerned about that.
Right.
I know we don't, I rewatch them, can't see them.
Right, okay.
But yeah, I'm more concerned about if we have somebody in row 2 holding
They
up a
can't
sign.
see, yeah.
Nobody behind that can see.
There might be value. It's really tough because this might be too limited, but would there be value in no placards? I just think I don't know if that's the right approach, but I think it is going to be very bad if we are then accused of some sort of viewpoint bias by telling only some folks that their placard is disruptive.
And so, as we discussed at the last meeting, the board has a great deal of flexibility and leeway to set the parameters of the meeting guidelines because it is a limited public forum. I would want to go back and just check to make sure that we're not going to cross that line by prohibiting visual displays before we make any full final decision on how you want to proceed on that.
Honestly, I'm open to whatever is more legally advisable, right? Like I'm concerned we could be open to accusations of bias and telling people to take down the plaque. But if you feel it's restricting all of them is worse legally,
Yeah.
then perhaps we keep.
And that's what I want to check, but and maybe the solution is we incorporate language that says the visual demonstration cannot obstruct the view of any other individual who is present for a meeting.
Yeah.
And that way they have to move, so they're not just standing
Right.
up in row
And you narrow it
2.
down.
They
You
move
narrow
to
it
the
down.
back or they move to
And
the
that's
side.
specific.
To me-
You're blocking the view of others. Please move to the back or lower your sign.
To me, that makes good sense. People could be wearing signs, but they have to be in the back so that they're not blocking anyone.
Right.
I actually, I don't know if that's too specific for a policy, but I think that I
I think that makes a lot of sense because you're not
Prefer
applying it to any
specific.
specific topic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it takes the issue out of the board's decision, and instead we're, I think that'd be good.
Well, I think we keep the language in here and add that too,
Mhm.
because the interferes with the rights of others to attend and observe the meeting is maybe a little bit broad.
This is the visual obstruction.
Right,
Mhm.
but there also might be situations in which there is threatening or inappropriate language that we feel like is,
Mhm.
and so I
Yeah,
would like to
absolutely.
keep this language and add what we talked
Absolutely,
about.
that makes sense.
I think that's where we're gonna need a legal opinion. is
Right.
On, because
Right.
we all know First Amendment
Right.
signage outside of here,
Correct,
tough.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
we've all seen it, so.
Right.
I do have more, but maybe one more substantive, and then I want to hear from my colleagues. I think I have, I think the random assigning of public speakers remains better. I really think that to have a specific policy that if all slots are taken and you spoke in the last meeting, you can't speak, is actually, I think, very restrictive, especially when we're taking away the organizational distinctions. And so then there's just going to be folks who have really, I don't know, a vested interest in speaking on, I don't know, particular board items who would only be able to speak at every other meeting. And I think that while of course everything, I'm not saying that you're wrong on the algorithm, you know, that's not completely random. It's certainly not FCPS staff picking and choosing. There would be no bias in the computer algorithm of who gets to speak. And yeah, I continue to think that is far better than saying if you spoke at the last meeting, you can't speak at the next meeting unless there's open slots.
So Mr. Bass, I think you're right that there wouldn't be a reflection of bias by the staff. But I mean, I'm going to analogize to when I pull out my iPod and I say random select me some songs and I hear the same 4 songs that start every single time. That tells me that it's not really random. And so what my concern is that it's always the first person who signs up, the 4th person who signs up, then the 3rd, you know, that will become a predictable pattern and not really random. And I mean, we're not going to have the same kind of randomization system that my iPod has. I assume that my iPod is more advanced than anything that we would be using, but maybe not.
They still make iPods?
There you go.
Okay, the music app on my
Good for
phone.
you for hanging in there.
Well, the first time he said it, I was gonna let it go, but we kept with it. But
Showing my age a little.
No, I think that's a good point. I think we just have to be careful on how we approach this. I don't know that saying someone who spoke at the previous meeting can't speak at the next. I don't know that that's the right approach. So yeah, I think we just need to think about this carefully.
So I think also in you know, Dr. Shergo, you can correct me if this is different than your understanding. In other LEAs, they don't do randomization. They take them first come, first serve, and they don't have that piece of we're going to take, if you've spoken before, we're going to bump you to the bottom. They don't do that. For us, I think the idea was that means we're not going to have the same 15 people every single session. And that's exactly one of the concerns we want to make sure we're addressing, that we're not going to end up having just 15 regular speakers and not giving other individuals in the community the chance to speak.
And yeah, and I think the spirit of what we're attempting to design, and I think both the randomization and this accomplish it just differently, is an issue of equity. So if you do first come, first serve, you will favor those who can sort of mobilize themselves and their friends on a topic to take up the slots. And if you do truly want to hear from a range of individuals, you've got to pull out the first in line gets the mic. You've got to pull that out. And so we're trying to accomplish that. And I think both are options. I would like to suggest we really go back and talk with staff, which is really Catherine and Sabrina, because they would have to really figure out the operationalization of this. And we want to make sure that it makes sense to them as well. Would you be comfortable of us coming back to the board policy committee with some options?
I am. I'm less concerned about the randomization, honestly. I'm more excited about the 10 slots dedicated to the agenda items and the action, because what we've seen is the majority of the public comment that we're receiving is unrelated to the business that we have on our agenda. So I think that those 10 slots will give people the opportunity who are coming to speak about things that we have on our plates for that evening will be more beneficial. And then those 5 slots, like, I think it does work to rotate people, particularly with those 5 slots, because I'm not even sure we'll get 10 people to talk about things. I mean, we actually do have some things on our agenda coming up that we'll get comments about, I'm sure. But I think that solves some of the concern that that we are hearing
Mhm.
frequently from the same people.
Yeah,
And so being able to adjust that, those 10 slides, and being able to hear from students too, so
And-
that's my.
and I-
That might work, guys.
And I wonder if what we will end up seeing is what we saw today, actually, with Ms. Dirks, who stood up and said, "I'm here not just on behalf of my organization, but I'm sharing with you what these other two organizations have also agree with me and have authorized me to say." You may have one individual stay up and say, "You know what? I am speaking for Ms. Gallagher, Mr. Rose, and Mr. Bass when I stand up here and say this." And you might see more of that, which gives you that flavor of how expansive the concern or the thought is, without having necessarily to have all four people standing up and speaking.
And we have the email, which we get a lot of emails already to our BOE email address that is addressing, some of the hot topics as well. And so I think that's another way that if people don't get on the list, they have an opportunity to still communicate, this is of concern to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are good points, and there's probably no perfect solution, but I think this is better than what we have. I may have more questions after, but I'll pause here.
Yeah, I'm actually make a few tweaks like we talked about today, because I'm more interested, frankly, getting this in front of the board for a first reading so that because we'll get feedback from them
Mhm.
if they feel strongly about we just make a few little tweaks and let's get it before the board as a first
Understood.
reading,
Okay.
because I'd like to get the ball rolling on this. Because if we're gonna have to do a first, come back.
And I don't think we have
Second, come
policy on
back.
the agenda till June.
Right.
Correct.
So my preference is I like where we're headed, and I'd really like to get this implemented as quickly as possible within our policy. So I'd like to get this taken care of as quickly as possible. On the one topic that you did bring up, I would prefer, I don't know how the others feel, is that we do change that language to will.
Okay.
About if the 15 minutes aren't used,
No.
we will. Let's just get the discretion of the board out of there. I prefer it to be specific. Let's just say we have 60 minutes, students get 15. If they don't take the 15, we're going to use 60 minutes.
You get another 5 speakers out of it.
I don't like the discretion of the board thing.
I
think I like will.
I support that language change. We should think about, if we have many, many students who sign up, are they eligible to speak in public comment after the student time? And I don't know, right? I mean,
If there's slots available.
So that's an interesting point,
Yeah.
Mr. Bass.
Yeah.
Is a student limited to signing up for the student slots, or could they also sign up for the general slots? And I don't think we had any intent to limit the general slots by perspective.
We didn't, but I would. I would limit the student time to the student time, because we do need to be sure to have time for our community to come and present their perspectives. And for the same reasons that we don't want to have one person, the first speaker at every meeting, we also don't want a host of students who are all able to sit there at the exact time that this opens and flood us so all 60 minutes become student comment, because that's not our intention either.
certainly. Should then it say student public comment, non-student public comment? It's a weird distinction to say that the later is our open public comment and not be open to students. I feel like what we're actually saying, and I think I support this, is student public comment, 15 minutes, non-student public comment, 45 minutes. And I support Mr. Rose's suggestion on if the students don't use all the 15 minutes, that goes to non-student public comment.
And even if we put community, but in parentheses, non-student,
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
something like that. And then I will be interested to hear the conversation among the full board about how we randomize ourselves, about if someone has spoken before, whether they will get bumped if it's full. I'd just be interested to hear the full board comment, because I think about, I ran on advocacy, whether I believe, side with them or not. But, I think about like our Brunswick folks, or prior to that, Sevillersville, is that they almost chose a spokesperson, and that spokesperson speaks at every meeting. So let's say that spokesperson is signing up for them every time, whether they speak first or fifth. Would we be, we'd be dampening their opportunity to advocate because it's the same person.
Well, I think what you're saying, the thing is advocacy limited to public comment sessions? I would argue no. So to me, you are institutionalizing electronic public comments in a way that you're going to have a much broader perspective, because people are going to know, I didn't get signed up, but don't you worry, I'm going to light it up, in my email, and it's going to live on Board Doc. So anybody who submits written public comments, it will be memorialized in our meeting notes. And so I think we have to maybe try to shift together with our community to say that to come in person is not the only way that advocacy can be realized.
Mhm.
And I think that's just going to be a shift for people. But I'd say most of the other LEAs we looked at, they had a very robust written submission of public comment process that seems to address some of what you've articulated.
And I think
Yeah.
everyone knows this. I was a huge proponent of, I want people to speak on agenda items.
Exactly,
I
yeah.
want them to have preferential.
Yeah,
That's important that we hear from the public when
Sure.
we're discussing whether it's informational or action.
yeah.
It's important that we give those people an opportunity to be heard.
But I
So,
hear your point,
strong
Mr.
belief.
I hear your point, Mr. Rose, about sort of this sort of magnitude, right? Public comment is magnitude. When you think about Brunswick or any sort of community that comes out in mass, I think whether or not they have one slot and a public comment or 5, when the boardroom is filled with people wearing shirts and standing in salute to the comments of a colleague or a representative, I think that also has a tremendous visual impact for the board and the public as well. So I think between written and public, and then that sort of showing up, the visual representation, I would hope that will both honor the interests of our community and feeling seen, heard, and understood, and the board and being able to also get other business done. That's the spirit of it.
Mhm.
But if you feel like we're going to be restricting that in a way that isn't going to feel good to people, we just have to review how we want to do it.
No, I feel good about it. I'm just curious to
Yeah,
hear
no,
what the discussion will be when we do the first reading. And I'm just trying to think, and excuse for everyone, excuse my language here, but we all know the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And we have great intentions, and then we get just obliterated because we're the ones that get the blowback
Right.
because of something that really we feel strongly about that's
Sure.
necessary. Like, I'm willing to take the blowback on agenda. I want to hear from people who are here to speak on agenda items. I will support that. I just want to be careful about we're eliminating people. You know what I mean? You spoke last time, and because we're already limiting it to 5 slots. If we have 10 people who are coming to speak on agenda items, if they're just here to advocate for something that they know is forthcoming, like redistricting is not on the agenda tonight. But
Right. They want
if
to
they
lean
were,
into that.
it's a long-term process. If they're coming every week to talk about redistricting,
Right.
I just want to be careful that we're not dampening their voice. I know they will probably figure it out. Instead of Bill signed up this week, Steve will sign up, Jackie will,
Right, they'll rotate.
they'll figure it out. I just want to make sure when we communicate this, that we're not.
Well, and you could again, 15 is the golden number to get to the 45 minutes. And with transition, it'll take more than 45 minutes, but it's about 3 minutes a speaker times 15 people is where the 45 comes from. So you could also, as a board, decide to redistribute that, right? So if you're saying you feel like maybe that's not in the right balance, you could do
8 and 7.
8 and 7. You could distribute it differently if you're concerned about people feeling like we've prioritized.
Well, I think we're already saying that though. If the 10 isn't full,
Yeah, we are.
we're going to redistribute it to general
True,
comments anyway. So I think we're already taking care of that. I'm just being devil's
Yeah.
advocate for what maybe the rest of the board and us preparing for
And
that
and
type of discussion.
it may be that the full board has more of an appetite for reducing. I know we talked about
Yeah.
not reducing the 3 because we're already taking the 5 and bringing it down. But we reduced the 3 to 2, and now you've added another, 10 speakers. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting we change this now, but maybe that's something in, as part of the discussion, the fuller board considers.
No, and again, like I said prior, I'm comfortable with let's get this in our first reading,
Yeah.
you know, and then let's all comment on it, and it'll come back to us anyway, and we'll get a feel for how the entire board feels about it. And I did have, on the community listening sessions,
Mhm.
I'm one that I would love to do one per quarter, but again, kind of going back to the under promise, over deliver. I don't know if we wouldn't be better served to just say 3 per calendar year.
Okay.
Because of our summer break, we might as a board want to do 4, but I wouldn't want to do, like you just said, I don't want to say 4 and do 3. I want to do them. I'm all for 1 per quarter. I just know among trying to get 7 people and trying to make sure it's valuable, that I think it to be valuable, 3 of us have to be there.
Correct.
And I wouldn't want to have a community listening session and have 1 board member or 2 board members show up just because we said we'd do 4.
Would
I'd
you
rather
want,
say 3 per calendar year. And, the minimum, and let's as a goal of our board, let's try to do 4.
Mhm.
Would
Just
you-
like the under promise, over deliver.
would you want to do 1 per school calendar quarter? Because we run a 4-quarter system, so we could align it that way and still do 4.
I think that's still just a lot.
Okay.
It's just my opinion of when I'm trying to think about herding 7 people and making sure we have a minimum of 3 present in a community, and I would like more than 3. But
Yeah, I do think your point about the frequency is important. And I think that the only pause around doing it around the school quarter is like, the first quarter, pretty much, it starts in August and it's done in October. It'll take some time to schedule these and get them out. You might have
Yeah.
some you might have 2 in the second
'cause
quarter.
then that kind of recognizes
You know what I
that there
mean?
might be a summer break.
Right.
We'll do 3 per
Yeah.
calendar year. We might get 4 in. As a
Yeah.
board, we could make that a board goal. Let's try to do 4.
Okay.
I'm just trying not to communicate to the public. We're doing 4, and then all of a sudden in July, we say, you know what, we can only get 1 board member. We're going to cancel that one.
Yeah, you don't.
Before we make that change, I think it will be important to think about, are these geographically spread out,
Mhm.
or are these centrally located? If we're trying to do each feeder pattern,
Right.
then I think 3 a year is actually way too low, right? With 10 feeder patterns, right? It could, in a 4-year term on the board, right? We would be in some cases visiting each feeder pattern just once for these. I think if we're looking at feeder pattern, I think we have to strive for no less than 4, because 2.5 years between visiting each feeder pattern, I think I'm doing the math right, is 2.5 years feels like a long time. To go any longer than that between visiting each feeder pattern for one of these listening sessions, I think is too long. I think we could consider not basing it by feeder pattern, and then I'd be more comfortable with the 3. But by feeder pattern, I honestly think we need to strive for 6 a year, and so that we can be there every other year.
And Mr. Bass, we deliberately left out the notion of it being tied to the feeder pattern, because, we came to the realization that tying it to feeder pattern doesn't necessarily address the specific community issues. If we set a schedule of a feeder pattern and, Brunswick is not in this year's feeder pattern group, well, Brunswick High is obviously a topic that a lot of people want to talk about. The redistricting, the Crestwood, thank you, I couldn't think of the name. That's obviously a topic that people want to talk about. Well, what if that happens to not fall in the feeder pattern group? And I think we decided, let's take that out of the equation, so we can, if we're picking a location, we can pick a location that aligns with the issue that we're talking about as well.
I was gonna say, the thing I think, I've having experienced this in another district, is what this looked like. And getting it so yes, it's once every 3 or 4 years would be the typical setup. the way that you could work around that is you could cluster 2 feeders together, right? So you could do 2 sort of relatively adjacent feeders. You could like Oakdale and Ligonor, I'm just pulling that out as an example. You go into the community, pick a school. I think the question is, what is the difference in the spirit of a community listening session that is topic specific and the idea of touching base with a community? Because whether or not you are in this, you are pursuing a building renovation and the support of the board, or whether or not you're under redistricting, every community in Frederick County has issues and interests that they want the attention of the board around. So the notion of doing it by feeder and not by pressing issue is that everyone gets access regardless of whether or not there's an active project going on. Doesn't diminish those other things. So that's another approach. You could community listening sessions. We can have a schedule published that covers a 2 or 3 year period. We could cluster them together. You could get to 6 feeders at 3 in a year. You could get to 6 if you put 2 together. And it gives school communities a chance to also, this isn't just a complaint session. I can picture these, and in my experience having participated in these, that they start with the community sort of presenting themselves to the board, talking about the things that make their community special, the things that make their school special, the things they want the board to know about what they celebrate in their community. And then there's sort of an exchange of what are the hot topics for us as a joint feeder. That would be the spirit of it that you might want to
And that's exactly what I got from when I was at National Convention from that district, was that they said the actual events evolved.
Correct.
That obviously during the initial ones, sometimes there was a little, but they evolved into exactly that. So they were really kind of a great event. It was. He said they've evolved into a kind of a showcase of the district. And I'm more interested in geography in Frederick County than I am with district. I'm thinking about if we, like, I can promise you, if we announced a listening session at Frederick High School in 2 weeks, everyone involved in the Crestwood redistricting, we'd have 1,000 people there.
Right.
Because they wouldn't care if we hosted it in Tuscarora or TJ. We hosted it.
It's run by
In
the
the
feeders,
city.
for the feeders.
Yeah.
They design
I'm more
it.
concerned about, we've never been to Thermont.
Right.
I'm more concerned, or to Brunswick, or out to Urbana. I'm more concerned with geography and bringing in those communities by geography.
So you
And if we want to use some type of feeder to track ourselves, I'm fine with that.
Well, the feeder would be inherent in the geography.
That's
they're
right.
Connected,
So I'm
right?
more concerned in a county like Frederick, and that's the idea I got. This was a huge district with fewer students than us. They had like 10,000 students, but their district was twice the size of Frederick. They were out west. And he said they felt it was really important to reach out to those furthest reaches of their district, even though there might only be 1,000 students out there.
So would the compromise be shifting this to 3 per school calendar year? But that's not specific to 3 feeders or anything. It would give you the latitude as a board to design the what, the who, the where.
And I'm not saying that we couldn't come together as we do our retreats and saying, well, we'd like to get 4 in this year. We've got some issues out in Monrovia. We'd like to host one out at Windsor Knolls, and as a board, try to set our own goals. I'm just talking about, this is what's in writing.
Yeah.
And we say we're gonna do a minimum of 3 per school calendar year. Wow, if we do 5, that would be awesome.
If I may, I agree with the geography, and I agree with the minimum of 3. I think we need to maybe be careful about not framing these around particular issues. Like when we're doing redistricting, we know we have an obligation to post
Right, and you do that.
opportunities for right. And so my preference would be that we do schedule them out based on geography, not feeder patterns, for the 3 this year, 3 next year, that they're not issue specific, that we know people will come out if there's particular issues they want to talk about, but that there's still the opportunity to add an ad
100%.
hoc
I don't want any agenda.
session.
I want a structure, but no agenda.
And rather than saying, something's happening here, so we're gonna go here. No, we already have our schedule. If there's an issue that we feel like we need to host an additional session.
Otherwise, you'll be in a position where
Yeah.
people are going to start demanding.
Yeah, I
the board to
misspoke
show
when I
up.
talked about Dell Monroe. I don't want an agenda. I want it.
But we know when there are
Listening
things
session.
that come up in
Yeah.
communities that we also need to be responsive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's not absolving us of that responsibility of being responsive when there are
Well, we'll
issues.
work on some refinements for you on that.
Because we've done that as a district in the past. We've had racial equity conferences, we've had, redistricting conferences at high schools. So but I think this specific listening session, it's important. Just allow the community to come in and share with us. And as this district shared with me, is that then cut down on needing public comment. Because people felt like they were being heard.
Right.
And they didn't, and even in a more personal way, they felt like they were heard because it's an exchange. And they said that their meetings, the public comment had dropped 50%. So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
One comment that we received from another board member was around the scheduling. So public meetings 1A. We typically adjust our meeting schedule in November. So we still have a meeting the fourth week, but it's not usually on Wednesday because of the conflict.
It's been the Monday of that.
the
Yeah,
Monday of
Thanksgiving.
So if we can just
So it's
specify
it's
that.
twice in November, but the second one is on a Monday.
Yeah, just adjust.
I was wondering if we could be more general with that statement in
General.
the sense that we've generally moved in May because of graduations.
Oh, she also mentioned.
Yeah.
Karen.
And we don't know for certain, I don't know, there could be a year that spring break would be in March,
It could happen.
right? So
Yeah,
I think to be as general as we can in that paragraph, that, right, the board, I don't know, perhaps, I actually don't know what the language is, but to be as general as we can in that paragraph.
Because we do say, except when such dates conflict with holidays or other events,
right.
the board meets regularly on the second, fourth Wednesday of each month. So we are kind of covered with that. Then we're saying with the exception of April and July, when, there's only one.
So then maybe it's April, July, November, and December that the board could decide to have two meetings, right? Generally, we've done one, we could decide to do two. We've recently started having some additional work sessions, which I think has gone well, in my opinion. So having two meetings instead of one in a month is something I could support. The November thing, I don't know, being a little more general on this is probably good.
We could dial this back and just make it, the board will meet 1 to 2 times per month, period.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I
I love how it makes it sound so simple.
I support that.
Yeah. When in doubt, be broad.
Are there any other pressing comments before we take this to the full board for their comments on 1 or 2?
Yes. No, I certainly, right, it's 10:30.
Yes.
I'd like you to look into whether, in terms of topics that public comment should not cover, whether religious proselytizing should be listed, or whether that would be, not a good idea to list that.
Understood.
That's all I have.
That's it. Yep.
So let me just quickly recap the tweaks that we'll make, so you know what it is you're recommending we take to the board. These are not necessarily in the order we discussed them, they're just the order that I've got them. Visual demonstrations will not obstruct view. The general public time does not include students. How to request an interpreter, the email or phone number, how we're going to do it. The clarification we talked about on the definition of a student. The community listening sessions reduction to 3 per calendar year, and the regular schedule of meetings of 1 to 2 per month. Those were the tweaks we're going to make, and with that is what will get presented up to the board. Oh, and then the will, not the may.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, yes, thank you. for all the work.
So the next item, did you actually vote to advance this to the board?
I make a motion that we advance this to the board for first reading.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next item is 1.05. This is policy 116, the Title IX sexual harassment policy. Really, and so this had been previously presented to the policy committee and was scheduled to come to the board. And then we implemented the template, and that gave us an opportunity to bring it back down, take another look at it. And so we're representing it to you. For the most part, other than aligning it with the template, it's pulling things out of it that really should fall into a regulation and not into the board policy. And I'll ask Ms. Nguyen, our Director of Human Resources, to speak to this, but for me, this is an opportunity to hear from you if there's something that we're pulling out as we think is a regulation that you are concerned about it not being in the policy. That's what I'm interested in hearing about, to make sure that we're going in the right direction. But I'll turn it over to Ms. Nguyen.
So a lot of the language that we pulled out belongs more so in the regulations, Mr. Willis mentioned, dealing with the investigative process, the grievance process, and what that should look like. So the language is still intact, it's just going to reside in a different place.
And has that adjustment already been made?
Yes, well, we did take the regulation to the superintendent's advisory committee.
Okay.
For that piece of it, we had some additional footnotes that were not carried over. So we are going for a second round review of that to make sure that they are included. But there were no major language changes to either part of it. It's just a matter of parsing them out to where they should reside, you know, the what versus the how.
And then one of the intentions that I have, and as we move forward with reviewing and approving policies and kind of creating a more clear line between policy and regulation, is that we are prepared to move those regulations, public, in line with the policy being approved by the board. So there's not a gap in time where what was in the board policy for investigations lives in the ether until we get the regulation ready. We don't want that. We want to have this regulation ready, so as soon as the board approves it, we can go forward and publish the regulation at the same time.
I mean, a policy like this, that would be my concern.
Yeah.
Is that it's been
They're
pulled
still
from the
married.
Right. It's been pulled from the policy, but the reg hasn't been updated. We want people to know where.
I support the changes. Makes sense to have it, most of this under regulation. I think the board has an interest in making reporting as easy as possible. And if there are thoughts on that would go into the regulation, I support making reporting sexual harassment as easy as possible.
I'm good. I'll move that we move this forward to the board with these proposed changes.
Second.
Fantastic.
And thank you again. Thank you both for.
Yes.
So
And I love this. To everybody, I love this idea of differentiating between our board policy and, like you said, the how, the regulations. So thank you for that.
Ms. Chappelle here, come on. So I've asked Kathleen Chappelle, our Director of High Schools, to come join me for policy 405, which is our graduation policy. This is the policy that establishes the requirements that students who hope to graduate will have to meet. It is required that we review it annually, and the version that we're presenting today will establish the graduation requirements for the 2023-2024 school year. Mostly these are clarifications on new graduation requirements and cleanup of old language. For example, the science requirement clarification. But I will ask Ms. Chappelle to just kind of talk about the changes.
So just for some context, the state of Maryland is finalizing direction on end of course assessments that are slated to begin next school year. And currently we know that science and social studies will move forward. And we also believe that English and math will not be included as end of course because they are already ESSA reporting and CCR measures. And so they will stand alone as a graduation requirement, but will not be tied to a student's grade. And so end of course assessments are slated to be 20% of a student's grade. based on the new state requirement. And basically, that will impact a number of regulations, including our grading regulation, which is referenced here. And so what you see in front of you is simply a name change from high school assessment to Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program, or MCAP, which is the new acronym for assessment, and references the COMAR that can be accessed to see the specific requirements for assessment. In speaking with Debbie Go-Martin of our testing department this morning, she indicated that the state will be sending out the recommendation that English and math not be included as end of course out for public comment shortly, and that needs to be out for 30 days. And so as a school system, we are just waiting for further direction. However, we've had an end of course work group that has been looking at the impact across the system, regulations, eligibility, all those. That's a whole additional presentation. And so on page 2, you just see that we have brought the students impacted. We have 2 sets of graduation requirements based on the changes the state made recently. And so for students who entered 2020, 2021 or before, we just put that up a little more readable for our public. They'll see that quickly. Same thing with the students who entered 21, 22 or later. And then, as has already been mentioned, we simply have clarified across from each of the requirements. And another good example is world language, 2 credits in the same language. That's an expectation that Frederick County has had for a long time, but the state COMAR now reflects that. It was not previously reflected in COMAR. And then for financial literacy, also the indication that we eliminated referencing students from 2012-13, who we hope are well on their way at this point, and indicated that we do have courses identified in the course guide that meet this requirement, and we have a standalone course to meet this requirement. So that's just a little more clarification. And on page 4, you see reference again to the assessment. And because the end of course assessments will impact grading, you see our regulation 500-5 noted there. And there is a regulation that is being edited and will be presented to the review committee for regulation so that it can be forwarded and updated as necessary. And I believe, other than the history and the related references, that is it.
I think I support these changes. Would you say that this is very similar to graduation requirements across the state because it's state mandated? Or what I couldn't fully pick up on, are there any distinctions here from other counties?
So Frederick County requires more than the state minimum, which is 22, and that has always been the case. And it varies across the state. We are on the higher end. There may be 1 or 2 counties that have, another credit. However, with the recent state increase in requirements, that may have changed. But in general, our additional pathway or additional electives that generally are in a student's pathway support a little more robust preparation for students.
And I will say that the financial literacy requirement is not something that every LEA has. I think it's wonderful that we have it. It should be everywhere, but the fact that we have it is fantastic.
Page 4 is, just to clarify, because we've actually gotten an email on this, is that page 4, we just need to make sure the public knows to refer to the regulation 500-5, that now those end of course assessments are 20% of that grade.
For science and social studies,
Okay.
right? For government and biology. So
Okay.
it will be course related, not every course.
Right.
And that is corresponding to what previously was the high school assessment that students needed to take and pass in order to graduate. And then we had some variations with COVID, or when there's field testing, there might be a participation requirement, and that varies from year to year. But the indication is that for the beginning with school year 24, that for our biology and social studies courses, the end of course assessment will be 20%. Right, and the regulations have not yet been updated. Again, we're waiting for final guidance from the state in order to make sure that we don't have to do this twice.
Motion to move this graduation policy to the board.
Second. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda, 1.07, is policy 444, and I'm going to invite Dr. Harris to come up to join me at the table. Dr. Harris is the Executive Director of Accelerating Achievement and Equity. This policy relates to educational equity and excellence, and it is brought before the board because the COMAR requires that this policy be reviewed every 3 years, and the last review was March of 2020. So we're a shade behind the 3-year mark, but we're close enough on point, and that we can bring it forward today. It needed to be raised. There really only are some, other than fitting to the format, there really are only a few very minor edits, which I will ask Dr. Harris to talk through.
So the policy as it exists is in really good shape. It's general enough, and then our regulations really drive the how to this. And so the only minor changes are with regards to in section C, number 3, it says the former language said looking at opportunity gaps among all student subgroups, and just taking the sub out. We are a much more diverse county at this point, and really at this point we are just over the percentage of more students of color than white as a county. And then in number 5 there, just really looking at the entire cycle of hiring, recruiting, hiring, onboarding, induction, retaining, so that there is concentration on every single stage of our employees from hire to retire. So those are only 2 changes that we have there.
So my biggest question was de-implementation as in place. And I'm just curious if how we talk about how we implement our policy of educational excellence for equity. I feel like by having that section be blank and not have any context for how as a system, or how, you see what I'm, it's concerned for me that I don't.
This is one of those places where we started the discussion where I said there's some cleanup that needs to be done. That's one of the sections that got through the gap. If nothing else, it needs to make reference to the regulations that correspond to this policy.
And there's a hanging statement out there at the end of number 7 that speaks to, in the spirit of continuous improvement, superintendent shall. And so that section really should go under that implementation piece there.
Yeah, the annual report requirement.
Reporting.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree. I think that's definitely one piece, is that if the superintendent is annually reporting, but what systemically does implementation of an educational equity policy, what is the superintendent reporting on? What's that? I would like some specificity here.
Okay.
Whether it's referencing specific regulations that support implementation.
We can bring this back with some more details in that section.
Definitely.
Would you be bringing it back to policy committee?
Yes.
Are you all okay with that?
Is it necessary, or are we confident that we'll just reference the regulation?
Well, I mean, so the pause that I have in responding is the reporting and what that reporting will entail. Would need to go back to the regulation to see if it articulates that, or if we would have to go back to the report itself and identify what the subjects are.
Yeah, and I'd really like the policy committee to weigh in on that, because our other like policies, policy 443, policy 117, some of them go very deep into implementation and directing the superintendent on specific activities.
Right.
And so I want to be able to look at all of those policies and the associated regulations to really balance what's the board purview and then what should the superintendent be doing in response to the implementation from the board.
Well, thank you for your patience with us on this one, because it's a review, so this is important that we get it back to us. So, thank you. Yeah, I agree.
I think when this is brought back to policy committee, can you bring us information, even, dates or the reports that the superintendent has annually reported to the board on the objectives as outlined above?
Yes, in all of our goal reporting, we report on educational equity as it relates to our achievement, our hiring practices, our budget and spending, so we can really highlight those things.
That it's embedded in those other reports?
That is embedded within those reports. And as a matter of fact, at a recent public community forum for the Racial Equity Committee, that's one of the things that we really took time to do as it related to policy 117. As we went through where we were with those things, we showed the community, here's where these data were reported in the previous board meetings. So we can do that for this policy as well.
And if I remember correctly, I believe the report submitted to the blueprint also includes a great deal of diversity and equity related analysis.
And we have an
Yes.
annual report, it's due every July 1.
All of that is really important information, and certainly I've gotten, I've been present at all of the, it will be interesting to see if there is value in the board receiving a very specific annual report on the objectives of this educational equity and excellence policy, separate from its being embedded in other reports.
I think that's a good consideration, because policy 117 also calls for that. And it very well may be that we just do a separate presentation on those policies as it relates to specific actions that's been taken out.
Sure. Good. Sounds good.
Yeah, so we'll bring this back. Thank you, Dr. Harris. No, I don't think a motion is required. So that brings us to 1.08, policy 314, political activity. And as you can see, Dr. Sergo and Tim Thornburg, our chief negotiator, has joined me at the table to talk about the political activity issues. This is an information and discussion only item. There's no action required. If you look at the backup copy that was uploaded to the website, all we did was drop the existing into the template. There is zero substantive change to the content of the policy, because we wanted to wait to have the conversation here. And so I'm first going to ask Dr. Sergo to speak, and then I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Thornburg, and then, of course, want to hear from all of you.
So I think just for context, the request to bring policy 314 to the board policy committee was initiated by the board in response to concerns that were received around political candidates wanting the same level of access to staff mailboxes or communication that is provided to our associations. It is our current position and recommendation. We think our current policy does not require any adjustments, and we have not brought forward any, nor has the policy committee specifically directed us to make changes. There are some little formatting things I've noted that we have to do in the implementation section, but we're really here to answer your questions. I know, Mr. Bass, you had raised some questions about sort of what the boundaries or the guardrails around our associations and their access to mailboxes and other things, but we believe the current policy reflects what the law requires and what our responsibility requires as it relates to our partnership with our labor unions and our associations. So we're here to answer questions. Tim is our subject matter expert, of course, And so we're here to test the board and see how we can support your interests.
So the language that's currently in the policy, you would say does not limit our free associations from communicating directly with their members
No.
around.
So I think, you know, and just to sort of speak to what I think Missy mentioned in her public comment and in my correspondence with her and the other 3 presidents, there was some perspective around the specific material that was handed out in the fall. It was perhaps to be pushing the boundaries of this policy. We revisited that, we discussed it, there was mutual understanding, and moving forward, that kind of a communication would not be authored in quite the same way to ensure it meets the expectations of the policy. So, you know, I think in terms of, I think Mr. Bass, your question was like, well, what's the censure process, right? If someone violates our policy, what do we do? And I think that's sort of what we do. We say, hey, listen, we think there was a violation here. We think there's a concern. We represent that, we discuss it, and we come to mutual agreement about how that will be addressed moving forward. We feel like we've done that. And so I think the question isn't as much about the policy as it is around the material in relationship to the policy. And we feel like we've addressed that in partnership with our associations and have a shared understanding of how to get at that interest.
Right. But we as a system cannot tell the associations what they can communicate with their members. That's not our role and responsibility. And so we identified the mailboxes of members within schools, and so the associations know who the members are to communicate with, and then for us, that's it.
And similarly speaking, we are under no obligation, nor should we be providing that same level of access to anybody who's not part of an association. So while maybe a political candidate would love that level of access, if it's part of a advocacy communication as part of the association, who are the explicit bargaining agent for our employees, they just don't have that same level of access. That's just the nature of how it works. I don't know, Tim, if you would sort of elaborate on that.
Sure. So Article 2 of the negotiated agreement and the teachers agreement speaks to teacher rights. And within the teacher rights, it indicates what teachers can and cannot do. And also in Article 8, it talks about academic and political freedom. And it's very clear that board policy and regulation determines how that material is to be used. I think as Dr. Sorgo said, there was just a very brief discussion that was earlier. It was all addressed, the parties reached agreement, but because they are the exclusive bargaining agent, whether it's SCTA, FACE, or FACASA, they do have certain rights that have been negotiated that are not available to other groups or political candidates. And that's just the nature of negotiations, which the previous board has granted to the association. It was not required, but it was a subject of negotiations at some point. Probably, Missy, you may remember better, it may have been at the very inception of the contract, because that is standardized contract language from my experience that associations like to have because they want to be able to communicate with their members.
There's federal law around associations and unions, is there not?
There is the federal law. The federal law is guidance, but it's not. It doesn't directly apply to our unions because our unions are enabled by the state legislature, the state enactment. So it's there as guidance, and the labor board will sometimes look to federal authority, but it is not binding on them. It is just persuasive precedent.
I think the question, Mr. Bassett, you raised was sort of in the section under D2 about what is not permissible, right? And so the question is, what's not permissible is, and you have to read the whole header, on school premises during an employee's work time or during school-sponsored activities, right? So it's sort of the whole thing incomplete. And it's soliciting votes for a particular candidate or against a candidate or ballot proposition. Is really the one I think that was questioned, was the material a violation of that particular non-permissible activity? Did you have a question?
Or perhaps C, distributing campaign literature.
Right, and so the material itself does not meet the definition of campaign literature because it is produced and authored by the association. that the material itself is considered association material. The question then becomes, inside of the material itself, whether or not there was a sense that it violated this particular aspect of the policy. So I guess what I'm underscoring here is the policy is more specific, and I feel like we've already addressed it around what that particular material pushed the boundaries of this policy in a place that we felt needed to be pulled back in and addressed, and we feel like we've done that. And so it will not look like that in the future. I have every confidence of that.
If I may add, also in looking at the policy, it talks about during an employee's work time and during school-sponsored activities. I think
Right, that's
the question came around not only, did the materials push the boundaries maybe, but was it distributed? Was it put in? When was the material put into the box? So there's really two questions. Did it meet the criteria? And number two, when was it put into the box? So the current policy is clear that it addresses during an employee's work time.
Is there specified time during staff meetings, for example, when association representatives are given the opportunity to directly speak with association members about, and would that be considered work time?
Ms. Dirks may have some different opinion, but typically my experience is during a staff meeting, and if the association representative would like to speak, sometimes that comes at the end of the agenda where the principal will say, hey, I've concluded my portion of the staff meeting. Your building representative may want to talk to you. I'm going to leave. So if you want to have that discussion, so.
What would that,
I'd be curious to hear in Ms. Dirks' experience if that does occur.
We do have contract language that allows the association reps in the building to be on the agenda, but that is what we always encourage to have it at the end of the meeting, because not everybody on your staff, and sometimes the staff meetings are both support staff and administrative staff and FCTA bargaining unit member that might not be members. So we generally encourage, and I think it is practiced generally across the board, that those updates fall at the very end and they say, the staff meeting is really over. Now's the FCTA time, and that's when they give the updates. I think that is, well, I can't say 100% of the time that's exactly what happens, but that's what we encourage our reps to ask for, that time in that way. And that is generally the practice of most administrators, to put the time there.
One thing that might help this policy is to have something in the definition section. We probably should define political activities. The very first sentence says the board affirms that using FCPS resources for political activities is prohibited. I think that political activity needs to be defined. I don't know, based on everything you're saying, seems like the associations did not violate this policy. But to have this policy and not define political activity I think we need to define political activity. I'd like to know how we define that.
Mr. Bass, if I may, in the FCTA contract, it talks about things that members are or are not able to do. For example, they can have conversations about political candidates or certain proposals, as long as they do it during their breaks or lunch. They can wear FCTA or FACE or FCASA materials. There are certain things they can do, as long as it is not a disruption to the worker education environment. And so part of the contract does spell out some of those things already that the board has granted rights to FCTA and the other associations to be able to do.
Sure, but this policy needs to apply to all of FCPS. This is not specific. While the questions address, well, the questions were around association activities. We are reviewing a policy for FCPS political activities, so I think we need to define political activities.
We can offer some language for that.
I think I have two more questions. Seems like we've said that email cannot be used for I don't know, political purposes, or I don't know what the rest of that sentence is, but it seems like we've said mailboxes, yes, email, no. I don't understand why we make that distinction. If something were permissible to be in the mailbox, why would it not be permissible to be in email?
My guess, but this predates us, but Ms. Dirks may remember, my guess is that we maintain the email, so it's considered a resource that the employer provides. The question is the mailbox a resource too? I'm imagining that has something to do with the idea of something, like for the same reasons why they're driving them in their personal vehicles versus using our courier. It's sort of, again, to the extent that we can put guardrails up around the optics of the employer weighing in on the position of an association or them doing their business. That would be the idea, I'm guessing. That would be-
Again, the associations communicate with their members
Correct.
via email. We're not restricting that communication
Correct.
based on what they're communicating. So
Right.
I think it's the same.
Right,
definition.
there is
They have
contract.
that right to communicate with their members regardless of what, we're not restricting.
There is language in the contract that talks about how the association has the right to use the inter-school mail, including email and teachers' mailboxes, to distribute official FCTA notices, flyers, and other materials, and such materials presented ready for delivery to the school representative. Then I think the question would become, if I'm working during the day and I'm sending these emails across FCPS's system, is that not the same as taking materials and putting it in the boxes? If they're doing it before or after their work day, then it becomes, I think, a different question.
So it goes into the notion that they can't use it for political activity.
Correct.
Right.
It's
And I think-
association communication.
Correct. So they can use email.
We're
Absolutely.
not restricting that.
Correct. No, we would not do that.
Yeah. I definitely think, as I said, I think political activity needs to be defined. I don't think it makes sense to limit email, but I feel like that was part of the discussion in earlier meetings. I don't see it in
It's in 2F.
2F.
It's one of the non-permissible activities is using school resources for political campaign activities. And email is considered one of the resources that we provide. It lists basically all the resources. Mailboxes are not considered a resource.
Yeah, how do I put it? I think that it's like I'm hitting on a point that may be a non sequitur. But I think that mailboxes are, I continue to think mailboxes are more of a resource than email. I don't know what effect that should have. I don't know if I'm asking that email be encouraged over mailbox use. I don't know that we need to make that distinction, but this feels outdated. I just wonder if this dates to a time that a copy machine, right, has a useful life. And if we continue to use the copy machine again and again and again, right, email is not, there's no useful life to email. And so I'm not sure why email is prohibited here.
Because we're restricting political activity across the board. So this is specific to political activity.
It doesn't matter, right.
So, I mean, we had a situation, I believe, last year where there were other political candidates who were using FCPS email as well to solicit support for votes. And so that would be restricted here. in any case, around any political activity is restricted, not just to email, but across the board. And so I am not understanding what
So-
the distinction.
I think there's a couple of things, Mr. Bass. First, you may be right that there is some language in here that is outdated. I mean, when was the last time any of us actually used a facsimile machine? Like, you might as well have Pony
Probably
Express.
when you use the iPod.
Right, yes.
We don't need medical information, just take these things that way.
Yeah, we
Oh,
do.
okay.
So they're still in use, but I think part of the distinction, though, is the email account goes through our computer system, through our server, and it doesn't disappear from our server until it's been deleted. There are going to be recorded backup tapes that we maintain because we are obligated to maintain backups of electronic communications and electronic documents. That's tying the system a lot closer than a mailbox is. And that may be
that's-
the distinction you're looking for.
Thank you. That I didn't think about it in that way. That so would it be correct to say because it goes across our FCPS server that
And the storage medium and, you know, whatever the backup system we use, whether it's a RAID drive or a secondary server, I mean, I'd have to talk to our DTI folk about that, but whatever that is, you know, it's using our resources and taking up space, frankly, in our resources when you use our electronic system, that you're not infringing upon or burdening the way when you're just putting something in someone's mailbox.
I think I understand more now. I would still compare it to mailboxes, but I think I understand more now. I guess I'm trying to argue two things. So one, I think as a policy committee reviewing this policy, you know, this needs to apply right to everyone, and that's why I'm really emphasizing let's get a definition for political activity. I think the final point that I'm trying to understand is there have been statements made by FCPS staff and the associations that nothing done in this last election cycle violated the policy. And there's also statements made that that there's been sort of an understanding that things can and should go differently next time around. And that kind of collaborative communication, I think, is good. You know, as people working together, that's good. It's hard for me to, sometimes policies should be a little more black and white. And it's just hard in the sense that I'm not hearing a distinction. I'm hearing both things. There was no violation of this policy, and we're going to do it a little bit differently next time around, I guess, to ensure that there's no violation, but there was no violation of policy based on what
I would say that differently.
Okay,
I think that we believe the material violated our policy.
you do.
Yes, and so we just, I hope that that was not misstated in any way. We thought the material, I'm using the words push the boundaries, but we'll say that the associations don't see it that way. They don't believe that they have violated our policy. This is not a new way of communicating. It is neither a new way of communicating, nor is it arguably a new type of print material. It has a long history, from my understanding, of being produced in this way. We felt like it did violate what the non-permissible are. The association saw it differently. We came together in reaching agreement about what could bring a publication like that up into alignment with the spirit of the policy. And I think we heard each other in understanding that. And so I hope that clarifies.
I would imagine that my colleagues are losing patience in the sense that it is 11:10 and I guess what I'm interested in policy, not in I think my comments in the March meeting, perhaps it was, I guess it was the March meeting, were quite, or no, we looked at this before March, I think, regardless, I think we're very, very pointed. And I guess what I would say is, you know, if we really emphasize the non-permissible political activities during an employee's work time or during school-sponsored activities, as long as the associations delivered these materials not during their work time, then I don't see why there would be a violation. When I look at that, it looks like political material. I personally would prefer that that not be allowed on a personal level, but I don't see how it violates our policy.
So you just captured the spirit of what our conversation was in the fall, right? And that's exactly the kind of dialogue that we had, that, you know, there was the associations did feel as you articulated, you know, that bold statement of when it happens and where it happens is sort of the line of determination. The material itself was felt to be a political material. And that was what became sort of the position of the system was, this reads and looks like, feels like a political material. And we had different perspectives on that. And so I think we've had a very collaborative relationship. I understand we have the same interests, right? We all want to meet the policies and we all want to make sure we don't interfere with our ability to have our associations do their business and engage in their advocacy. And so we felt like there would need to be some adjustments, which we all agreed upon, to meet the spirit of that. It was about the material, not about the distribution. And that was again, that's the spirit of our conversation. You've sort of captured it.
I have no, I have nothing new to say.
I have nothing else.
So it sounds like we're gonna work on some definition of political activity.
Yep.
And then there has not been substantial change otherwise. Can we bring this to the full board for?
I will say one thing, since it's specific about what's non-permissible, why couldn't we put mailbox under F? If that,
I don't know, but I feel like this has already been legally tested somewhere that I'm not aware
because
of.
we're only saying those very specifically. School premises during an employee's work time and during school-sponsored activities.
For political material, but arguably the association isn't going to ever use mailboxes for political material.
Then it wouldn't apply. Then 2F would never apply.
By adding mailboxes, it wouldn't restrict the unions because they're not engaging in political activity, but it would mean that a candidate could not ask that we put into every mailbox their vote for me flyer. I think that's the point Mr. Rose is trying to get to.
Because I agree. There's no, I mean, I see no reason why they couldn't email why couldn't they, we are in the 21st century, why couldn't they email the associate to everyone after hours? It's not non-permissible.
As long as it's not a political material.
Right. We've determined that with your all's agreement, spirit, the associate is not a political material. So whether they put it in email or in the mailbox, doesn't matter.
I don't necessarily feel like we need to change the language. It says.
And I'm fine with that. I was just saying,
No,
if
it's an interesting question.
if we're getting so in the weeds that we're identifying facsimile machines, you know,
And we say including but not limited to. So we're saying any school system resources, including but not limited to. So
that way that takes away the argument of, was it a resource or not? Well, it's only specifically under 2F. We're not restricting their right to communicate. So because it says after, basically what we're saying is after hours and outside of school-sponsored activities, as long as it's not deemed by spirit a political flyer, heck, they could use a fax machine if they so chose to do so. But
The only pushback
I'm joking, but
the only pushback I would give is, you know, we do have to draw the line as to where we stop articulating different resources. So we articulate mailbox. Are we then also going to say and they can't be placed on teachers' desks because the desk is a resource very similar in concept to, just like a mailbox is. I mean, at what point do we draw the line as to how many things we're going
Well,
to
then
list
we're
in
getting
our
too
item?
far into the weeds, because then they'd say, well, the teacher came in at 7:30 and there was a flyer on their desk.
Right.
That was during, I understand that. I was just trying to differentiate the argument about resource or not a resource, because it's not going to restrict their communication. We've deemed that newsletter is not, within the spirit that you've discussed with them.
Revisions,
It is not a political activity.
in the future, it should not be.
So
Yes.
therefore, as long as they don't distribute it during school hours,
So the question was posed, can this go right to the board, or do we need to bring it back here? We do need to bring it back here because this was an information and discussion. This was not an action item. So we do have to bring it back. That will give us the opportunity to put together the definition for political activity for you to look at. And we can also, just like we did with the meetings policy, we didn't look at just that one thing. We will take a look at the whole policy again and look to see if there's other updates or revisions, iPods and facsimiles, that we need to address in there, and bring that back to the board or to the committee. And given that we've already got a stable of policies that the committee has approved to bring to the board, that, it's not like we're hurting for things, policies to bring to the board to review.
Sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I would like Mr. Thornburg to have an opportunity to just sort of look at our negotiated agreements and make sure that we aren't setting ourselves up for some sort of a legal challenge, any sort of policy revisions that is an unnecessary, to your point, that we don't want to elaborate to an extent that we then are actually pulling back on our ability to be good partners. So I would like to have him be able to weigh in.
I agree. I mean, guidance or not,
Right.
I'm not for restricting the rights of our associations to communicate with their members. I think that is a slippery slope. That I've talked about this on all policy.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in exposing our FCPS to any type of litigation over something that we support. We want them to be able to communicate with our teachers.
And our policy has to support the board ability to say when candidates who are not supported by the associations object to the access, and we want the policy to be able to explain why the associations have access that is not afforded to candidates that are not endorsed by the association. I mean, I think that's the core of the issue that we are trying to have the policy address. And we want to make sure we bring you language that said, this is why the policy says this, and this is why that level of access is not afforded to all candidates. And it's not because we give political favoritism to one or another, it's because the access is actually not political. And that's the issue we have to make sure that the policy addresses.
But it's also about the collective bargaining agreement.
Right.
And
Right.
what you have.
I appreciate that, and I
recognize.
appreciate that, so.
Because candidates who are not endorsed will continue to challenge the kind of access that our associations have. And we just want to make sure that we protect the neutrality of the board and their position. I think, Mr. Bass, you always talk about, are we applying this consistently? We want to make sure that the policy speaks to that spirit.
Great.
Okay.
All right.
Let's work on that.
That was our last policy.
That was our last item on the agenda. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 28th. So that gives us some time to work on some good stuff for you. I will not be present at the next meeting. Ms. Daksha will be here in my place, so we can continue the work of the committee uninterrupted.
And remind me when we are coming to the full board with the policies that we recently reviewed.
So my understanding, and Mr. Rose, you certainly can elaborate from agenda setting, is that a determination was made by board leadership with Dr. Dyson that due to the sort of pressing business of the budget, that we were going to delay the full board review of any policies until at the minimum June 14th. So my understanding is on June 14th, a selected group of policies are coming forward for a first reading, and then we will sort of try to.
We'll get some clarification on that, because I thought that we added a June 7th session in part with the intention of bringing the meetings policy to the June 7th meeting for a first reading. But Mr. Rose, if you know something.
Since that was just recently added, we have not discussed specifically about that.
So the agenda for June 7th
Yeah.
hasn't been developed,
It's
but there's
Because for
possibility,
now, June 7th is specific to the budget.
right? It's a
There
budget.
may be time to maybe like that, maybe the policies that were just reviewed and
Right.
kind of a,
And the public comment, I mean, we did, I think 9 policies during the last session in April. But honestly, I would prioritize getting the meeting policy to the board first, above the 300 series policies that we
there's a
reviewed.
lot of those we just reformatted them.
Right, and I think that's a question, for you, Ms. Gallagher, as you talk with Mr. Rose and Ms. Johnson about, we probably can't get more than 3 policies on an average agenda for board discussion. And so we've already built ourselves up a little bit of a queue here with 9 waiting to go forward. And so we're gonna have to prioritize, starting in June, how we can try to get through those 9. I don't wanna say catch up, that's not the right word, but we're getting a lot more work done in policy committee because that's all we have to focus on. Then an average board meeting doesn't have the same runway for this kind of an elaborative discussion. And so we're always going to be a little bit slower in full board meetings just because of the nature of the full board business that has to be accomplished.
And Mr. Flores and I have had some of this conversation as well around, when we're looking at some of the policies where there haven't been some substantial changes, how maybe we can move through some of those.
Right, yeah.
So.
Yeah.
We have
That's
some
exactly-
strategy in
Give a
place.
strategy.
Exactly what I was gonna suggest,
But
and
there
then,
are going to
and
be
then you can
some,
come to
like,
leadership
what-
and say, there's no change, they were just reformatted. Let's
Yeah.
get them on
That's,
it, get
that's
them
the
done.
plan.
Good. Perfect.
Once we sort of get the board up to speed on how we've been proceeding within policy committee, which I think that's one conversation, and hopefully we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a
That's
good
the plan.
point. We'll get the board comfortable that we're bringing,
Right.
policy to them that's only been reformatted, but we're allowing time for those type of policies that
Right.
need board
They have to be
discussion.
comfortable with having less
Yeah.
discussion.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you for your work.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much, all your
Thank you.
patience
We are
and working
going
with us.
to
Thank you.
Officially adjourn.